Hello. Welcome to the introductory episode of Book Wormies. I'm your host, Aaron Helton, and this is my intro into the topic of, me. Alright, you may have looked online and seen a little bit about my bio, and if not, I'll tell you a little bit about what's on there. It mentions a little bit about my day job, which is as an executive coach and consultant. I utilize my master's degree in industrial organizational psychology, which, yes, is quite a mouthful, and I help business owners and businesses define their authenticity and emotional intelligence. So naturally, due to this, the nature of the books that I read tend to gravitate towards nonfiction. So generally, you hear about a podcast talking about book reviews, and I think you'd expect, or at least I did, expecting things like fantasy or true crime or maybe even romantic comedies on a bookshelf. But a lot of times I don't hear nonfiction. Generally, a book is talked about in a business podcast or something like that, and it just gets lost as a reference or a recommendation. So I'd like to talk more about the specifics of each of these books that I read. Generally, the topics tend to be self-help, psychology, or business. And a lot of individuals may hear that and think, this is going to be so boring. But one of the reasons that I read nonfiction is because I like to apply these concepts to my own life. I like to live the things that I read, and I like to apply them into my day-to-day. I always seek to improve myself as a human being, and a big tool for that is books. Now, I don't want to disparage anybody who loves fantasy, true crime, romance, anything like that. We all have different needs. My sense of adventure that might be found in a fantasy book, I tend to find through media or online gaming. And so my needs are met in a different way. That's why my books are found, or my need for self-improvement is found through books. That's simply the medium that I choose for it. And that's not to disparage anybody else's choices. And I hope maybe as this grows as a podcast, I'd like to see some fantasy readers or true crime hosts as well, and maybe we'll get some variety going. But that can generally set the expectation for the type of books that I'll review for you. So a little bit about myself that is not in my bio, because my bio tells you about me, but it doesn't tell you about me. 3 things you should know about me is, as far as my story goes, I was homeschooled and I had a tiger mom. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, a tiger mom is that Asian mother stereotype of you can't have dinner until you finish this piano ballad. And it wasn't quite so extreme. But understanding that it brought in some challenges of expectations, as well as homeschooling, bringing in some issues of social awkwardness. So I've definitely gone through quite a self-transformational journey. And then an additional point, just this last April, I was diagnosed with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And so that gave quite an explanation to my social awkwardness, for sure. But I talk about a lot of these constructs in my stories. As I mentioned, I use these books for self-improvement. So a lot of the times I may link concepts from these books to a story or a piece of growth that I had while reading these books. And I want to set that expectation for those who are coming with me on this journey to look at these books and think, what can I pull from this? Now, obviously, as a disclaimer, I can only speak to my own viewpoint. I am currently a 26-year-old male. I am of mixed race, and I have my own perspective from the way I grew up, the socioeconomic class that I fall under, the racial identity I have, and then my gender identity as well. So understand that my perspective will come in a certain way. Now, when possible, I'd like to state and reiterate that viewpoint in the moment, like, hey, here's my thoughts on this. And again, this is just my personal viewpoint. So I definitely love to implore listeners, when they read a book, to form their own opinions and utilize the topics in their own way. I absolutely love to hear how people grew through shared media or things that I've experienced as well, because that's how we connect as people. Finally, some things that you can expect as far as my podcast style. I have planned to review books in a way that is, first off, talking a little bit about the page numbers and the count and then the font size, because to me, a book can be giant, but also have giant font, and it makes it a much easier read than a small book that has very small font and is just an absolute slog. Some books are formatted in different ways, and I love to talk about the flow of it, the overall concept. I then also talk about a couple things like what impacted me, as I mentioned earlier. I utilize these books in my own improvement. And then second, things like flow, page count, how it impacted me, and then also the expectation I had coming into the book. Sometimes I'll mention, well, when I saw this topic, here's the idea, the bias that I formed coming into this, and here's how it subverted or fell right into my expectations. so you can expect a little bit of that. Finally, I may have moments of reading pieces of these books that impacted me. I am the type of individual to dog-ear my pages. I'm so sorry to those who hate that. And I also do tend to write some notes every now and then. So hopefully you enjoy hearing a little bit of page turning in the background as I find my way to the specific quotes that I enjoyed. Maybe read them out to you and say, well, this is what I was thinking when I read that. Here's how I grew from that. And I hope that, as I mentioned, it helps to create sort of a link between you and I as I say, well, this is the experience I had with this. And maybe as I read this phrase, well, what do you think? I would love to invite you to pause the podcast at points and sit and think and say, well, what am I feeling about that concept? Because my reviews, I would like to go further than recommendations. I would like to take them further to be almost discussions, potentially. I want to prompt you to think, oh, what could I utilize this topic for? And that just makes me absolutely giddy. So maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but ultimately, I thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for listening to my introduction, and I'm excited to jump into the world of nonfiction, self-help, psychology, business, and motivational books and tell you a little bit about how I grew through them and hopefully help you grow through them as well. Again, thank you for stopping by and welcome to Book Wormies.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode, proudly presented by the AP&M Group, a subsidiary of Algebra Productions, LLC. We strive to produce content that informs, entertains, and adds value to your day. We value your input and would be delighted to hear your thoughts in the comments about this episode. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, please engage with us in the comment section or via our social media platforms. Your feedback helps us shape our content and uncover new topics that matter to our listeners. If this episode resonated with you, we kindly ask that you rate and review this show on your preferred podcast platform. Sharing this podcast with friends and family helps us reach more listeners and continue delivering content you enjoy. For more information about the podcast, the host, or our parent company, please visit the link in this episode's description. Also visit us on YouTube and Rumble to see and hear every content produced by Algebra Productions. Thank you once again for your time and support. Until next time, stay tuned and stay inspired.